In this very in-depth forecast, the southeastern United States are currently being monitored for severe weather, as isolated severe thunderstorms could bring the possibility of an isolated tornado and isolated damaging wind gusts. Everything you need to know here on Gladiator WX. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for November 21st of 2025. For today we have a marginal risk for southern Kentucky, a great portion of Tennessee, a great portion of Alabama and Mississippi. Risks for today include a 2% tornado risk for the entirety of that marginal risk region, a 5% damaging wind gust risk for the entirety of that marginal risk region, but we don't really have any hail risk for today. For tomorrow, we currently have no issued areas for severe thunderstorms that we're currently monitoring. And then for day 3 outlook, we currently have a marginal risk for central into western Texas there. For day 4, day 8 outlook, we currently have no issued areas. Taking a look at our excessive rainfall forecast for today, we have a slight risk for Southern California into portions of Arizona there, with a marginal risk that extends further northward into South Carolina. For tomorrow, we don't really have any areas that we're currently monitoring for the possibility of flash flooding. Then for day 3 outlook, we currently have a slight risk for southern Oklahoma into a great portion of Texas there, with marginal risk that extends further into Arkansas and portions of Louisiana there. For winter weather outlook, for the probability of snowfall greater than 4 inches, for today we currently don't have any concerning areas when it comes to heavy snowfall. Same with tomorrow, or same with our day 3 outlook. However, we could see the possibility of some heavy snowfall in some elevated regions of the Rockies. Taking a look at our weather model, starting off with our 500 millibars and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. We currently have quite a lot of broad westerly flow across this region, with broad westerly flow at 500 millibars, with a shortwave jet that's currently further off to the west back into the Central Plains. However, we are going to see some strong 500 millibar flow, or decently strong 500 millibar flow. It's definitely going to be a bit more on the marginal side, but definitely sufficient synoptic scale forcing for the possibility of severe thunderstorms across this region. With 500 millibar flow, that's going to be ranging anywhere from 30 knots to potentially up to 40 to 50 knots in some regions. Taking a look at our 700 millibars or low-level jet and how that's going to indicate our risk for tornadoes for today, we're currently having a very marginal, very weak 700 millibar jet across this region, very marginal low-level jet across this region, with the 700 millibar flow upwards of 30 to approaching 40 in some regions, but mostly around the 30s. So definitely pretty weak 700 bar flow, but definitely going to be sufficient for the possibility of some weak shear in our shear profile, supporting the possibility of a marginal risk for tornadoes. However, it's again definitely going to be quite a marginal risk given our very weak low-level jet. Taking a look at our 850 millibars and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes across this region, we're going to see some greater shear across Alabama. However, this is going to mostly be associated with some rain showers. This shouldn't really be able to be used by our risk for severe thunderstorms for today, as the main areas for severe thunderstorms around this time that we're currently watching is going to be a band of storms that's going to exist across Mississippi into portions of southeastern or southwestern Alabama, maybe into Louisiana as well, with some rain showers out ahead of that is causing a bit of a hindrance to our severe thunderstorms, as it was morning convection, and it did put a little bit of a hindrance on the atmosphere. There is a cold pool right where this 850 millibar flow is, upwards of the 30s and 40s. So any storms that develop in this region is going to be tapping into some very, very weak instability, probably not really going to be sufficient for tornadic development. So this 850 millibar flow is basically just going to be wasted. And then further off to the north, where we could see the possibility of some of a second round of storms that's going to develop later on in the evening, off around the Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas region. We're going to see some stronger 700 millibar flow, but we're still not really going to see any great 850 millibar flow either. So that's going to be leading to very, very small curvature in the low levels of those photographs. In some places we probably won't even see any curvature in the low levels of these photographs, but it will definitely support the possibility of some marginal storm relative felicity, but again, very marginal. Taking a look at our 200 millibars and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms for today, we basically have no 200 millibar flow that's going to be significant or sufficient for really much of a hail risk at all. With 200 millibar flow, that's barely going to be getting into the 60s in some regions for a great portion of this marginal risk. Further off to the north, we could see some stronger 200 millibar flow upwards of 70 knots. I doubt this is really going to support that much of a risk for large hail in any capacity. There's the possibility, maybe, given our 500 millibar flow and some weak bulk shear across this region, that we could see the potential for some isolated small hail, but we are not going to see a risk for large hail in any capacity. Taking a look at our storm relative felicity and how that's going to affect our risk for tornadoes for today, we are going to see some okay-ish, pretty decent storm relative felicity across this region, given our weak low-level jet. You can see already in that cold pool region, which I'll show you on temperatures, we do have some stronger shear. However, again, storms are going to struggle in that region, so I don't really expect that much of a tornado risk to materialize in that region, but there is the possibility of one maybe materializing. Again, the main area for the possibility of tornadic development, given some pretty decent shear across that region, is going to be further off to the west, with a storm relative felicity anywhere from 100 to 30, 100 to 40, potentially even greater meters squared to second squared of storm relative felicity. Then further off to the north, where we're going to see that potential for a second round of storms. Again, decent storm relative felicity, mainly being powered by our 750 or 700 millibar flow, with 180, potentially even higher meters squared to second squared of storm relative felicity. So definitely quite a bit of decent storm relative felicity and going to be sufficient for the risk for an isolated tornado across this region. Taking a look at our bulk shear and how that's going to indicate our lack of a risk for hail development for today. We do have, again, really weak bulk shear, a little bit stronger bulk shear given some stronger flow overall further off to the north, more back into where that flow is advecting from that short wave, where we could see some stronger flow, again, upwards of 50 knots when it comes to bulk shear at 0 to 6 kilometers further off to the north there. But however, further down to the south, where we basically see virtually no significant 200 millibar flow, we're going to see bulk shear values that are barely going to be reaching our 30s in some regions, or barely reaching our 40s in some regions, but we could see the possibility of some 40 knot bulk shear, 45 knot bulk shear, maybe higher. But again, really weak bulk shear. Probably not gonna really support that much of a robust, severe risk. Again, given our bulk shear, because we really need bulk shear, we need speed shear. It's a crucial part for supercell development, as it separates our updraft and our downdraft. However, because we don't really have that bulk shear, our storms could struggle quite a bit, and then we're also not going to see that much of a hail risk either. We could see, again, the possibility of the risk for isolated hail for some of these storms, definitely the risk for isolated hail further off to the north, with some of our later storms, if even, because it does look like our bulk shear is going to die down around the time that those storms do develop. But again, maybe the potential for an isolated hail risk to materialize. But if that hail risk does develop, it's definitely not going to be large in any capacity. At most, probably just pea-sized hail, if even. Taking a look at our composite reflectivity and what that's going to indicate for our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. Everything has honestly quite have died down quite a bit, as I am making this forecast a little bit late. These storms are currently ongoing across Mississippi into Alabama. Probably some of them might be moving into the cold pool that was associated with some of these earlier rain showers. So these storms are definitely going to be quite marginal, probably not supporting that much of a severe risk at this point. But again, there is the possibility for an isolated severe risk. And then we could see the potential for some more isolated development to develop further off to the north into Mississippi, Alabama, or sorry, Mississippi and Tennessee later on in the evening. And that's going to be interacting with a little bit more, a little greater synoptic scale forcing with a cold front that's going to move into that region, but also stronger flow aloft. So we could definitely see a quite different risk for severe thunderstorms develop further off to the north. However, when it comes down to our risk for severe potential, with it being so late in the evening, and potentially even into the AM hours, there is the possibility that storms are probably not going to see a whole lot of instability. If there is going to be surface-based cape, it's probably going to be capped over. These storms probably won't support that much of a tornado risk. While it is possible, I think a lot of these storms might be surface based, but we'll have to look at our surface instability for that. Taking a look at our 200 millibars, you can already see where that cold front, or sorry, that cold pull is. Further off down to the south, you can see where there's substantially colder temperatures across Alabama, even stretching into Georgia, maybe even to portions of Tennessee, even where we do have some stronger, not stronger, but some warmer temperatures further off to the west, where some of those storms might exist in Alabama and Mississippi, where some of those storms currently do exist. That's along a boundary. I'm not entirely sure what type of boundary this is. I'm pretty sure it's a warm front. You can see the wind shift there. However, the temperatures make it very hard to discern. So I do believe it is probably a warm front, though. Even though there's not really a whole lot of a surface low in whatever this weird looking warm sector is. But storms are initiating off of a bit of a boundary there. But however, any storm that's going to be either firing further off to the east or currently in this region, or maybe even moving into this region, into this cold pole, is definitely going to see quite a hindrance when it comes to storm development, as it's going to be quite limited on instability. And then for that second round of storms, again, it's going to be very late into the evening with temperatures that are going to be dropping down into the 60s, the mid 60s, potentially even into the upper 60s further down to the south. However, again, that's probably going to be the least of our concerns, given the fact that we're going to probably see a capping inversion across a lot of this environment later on to the evening hours. That's going to be quite a hindrance for storm development. Taking a look at our dew points and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. These storms that are currently ongoing are actually currently in an environment of really, really nice dew points. Dew points that are potentially going to be getting upwards into the upper 60s, potentially even to the low 70s in some regions further off to the west. If any of those storms are currently in that region, they're definitely going to be able to tap into some really decent instability, given our really nice temperatures across that region, and then also really, really high dew points. And then further off to the north, we aren't really going to see too much crazy instability like further down to the south, but we will see some pretty decent instability with mid to potentially even upper 60 dew points further off to the north. However, by the time storms do potentially develop, they are going to be experiencing some weaker dew points, with dew points that are going to be back into the more so mid 60s. With probably not a whole lot of upper 60 dew points, but still supportive of some decent instability across that region. Taking a look at our mid-level lapse rates, and then we'll look at our low-level lapse rates later. We do have a thin corridor of some nicer lapse rates compared to the rest of the environment, with lapse rates that are potentially going to get upwards of 6 degrees in this region, in this little thin corridor there where storms currently exist. That's definitely going to aid with instability at least a tiny bit. However, it's definitely not going to be aiding with our hail risk, given the fact that we don't really see any potential for shear whatsoever. And then later on into the evening, these lapse rates won't really be able to be accessed by any of the storms that may develop further off to the north later on in the evening, as they're just going to be too far to the west. However, we will see very weak lapse rates, absolutely horrible weak lapse rates. So definitely not going to be seeing any aid when it comes to lapse rates or instability there. So that's going to be another hindrance for our storms again, as very weak lapse rates will probably cause storms to struggle when it comes to upscale growth. And then taking a look at our low-level lapse rates, again, it looks like a lot of the same thing as well. We don't really have any great low-level lapse rates in any of the regions for severe thunderstorms. As you can see, a couple of hours later on our model run, before that second round of storms even considers its possibility of development, there isn't really any low-level lapse rates across that region at all. So again, definitely no support coming out of our low-level lapse rates either. Taking a look at our most unstable cape and how that's going to indicate our risks for severe thunderstorms for today, we do have some decent instability across that region, again, given our strong hefty dew points and our really strong temperatures, or really hot temperatures across not really hot, but really decent temperatures across that region. And then a little bit of assistance from those those weaker lapse rates, but also it's above 6, which is what we want for at least a little bit of assistance when it comes to upscale growth with lapse rates, or sorry, most unstable cape that could potentially get upwards of the 1000s to mid 1000s, potentially even the low 2000s in some regions. So again, really nice instability that's going to be available to these storms. The main limiting factor again is going to be the hindrance when it comes to our lapse rates, preventing great upscale growth. And then our bulk shear as well, which is going to be limiting supercell development and the difference between our updraft and our downdraft, um, allowing the downdraft to basically fall pretty much right on top of our updraft, which is going to kill it off rather quickly. And it's also going to push the cold pool from our downdraft a lot closer to our updraft, which is probably going to cause our storms to ingest a lot of their cooler air. But again, really nice cape values. It's a shame that we don't really have anything else to really support that much of a risk for severe thunderstorms given our cape values. However, further off to the north, we see even weaker cape values. And by the time storms do develop or potentially develop further off to the northwest, we're going to see weaker cape values upwards of 1000, the low 1000s in some regions, and the triples, the triple digits. So again, marginal instability, but definitely going to be sufficient for the possibility of an isolated severe thunderstorm and the possibility of an isolated tornado or two. Taking a look at our surface-based cape and how this is going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms for today, we are going to see some rather sufficient, but again pretty marginal surface-based cape across this region. With surface-based cape that looks almost identical to our MU cape, at least for the first couple of hours when it comes down to our storms that are further to the south here. And then that round of storm that might that round of storms that might develop further off to the northwest is going to be seeing more marginal, definitely significantly weaker surface-based cape compared to our most unstable cape. So indicating more sin across that region, more convective inhibition. However, may be sufficient for the possibility of an isolated brief tornado depending on how storms look. But again, rather weak, rather marginal, going to support a very marginal risk for severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our surface-based convective inhibition, how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. As of right now, we currently don't really have any hindrance when it comes down to our storms further down to the south. With convective inhibition, it's mostly just an open environment, no capping in place. However, you can tell that really quickly over the next couple of hours, that cap will be strengthening across that region, which will definitely put a stop to any further severe potential, and further off to the north as well. By the time storms potentially develop, there will be a lot of convective inhibition in place. There may be some areas where it might be weaker, but again, it's going to serve as quite the hindrance for storm development off to the northwest there. In some areas, again, we might see the possibility for an isolated, weak, brief tornado. However, this environment just really isn't favorable for the possibility of severe thunderstorms, but it is potentially supporting the possibility of severe thunderstorms. But again, very weak, very marginal, and very limited. Taking a look at our 0 to 3 kilometer instability and how that's going to affect our risk for severe thunderstorms for today. We do have a really nice pocket of 0 to 3 kilometer instability right where storms are currently ongoing in that southward section, with a 0 to 3 kilometer instability upwards of 120 130 joules per kilogram. So going to be aiding those storms a little bit down to the south, and then off to the north as well, with that second round of storms that might develop. We do have some nice surface-based instability here, or not surface-based, but 0 to 3 kilometer instability here. With 0 to 3 kilometer instability upwards of 130, 140, maybe even higher joules per kilogram of instability across that region. Definitely going to be providing quite the assistance when it comes to severe thunderstorms development. However, given the convective inhibition that's going to be above this layer, I don't really see storms tapping into it a whole lot. However, in some areas where convective inhibition might be weaker, there's definitely going to be an abundance of 0 to 3 kilometer instability, and very marginal surface-based instability that storms could utilize in supporting a risk for severe thunderstorms. Taking a look at our energy elasticity index values and how that's going to indicate our risk for tornadoes for today. We have some very inline energy elasticity index values for 2% tornado risk. We typically see energy elasticity index values that look pretty similar to values like this when it comes to a marginal risk for tornadoes, with energy elasticity index values across a great portion of the region that are either less than 1 or potentially getting up into the low ones in some regions, with energy elasticity index values in at upwards of 1 in the southern portion there. Again, very small curvature in the low levels of the hodograph. As you can see, no elongated hodograph whatsoever. It's basically really bunched up there in the mid to upper levels. So we're not going to see that risk for hail, but we do have curvature in the low levels. Again, supportive of the possibility of a tornado risk for today further down to the south, and sufficient instability to support that tornado risk as well. And then further off to the north for that second round of severe thunderstorms that might materialize. Again, very weak energy elasticity index values. We're probably really not going to see that much of a risk for tornadoes further off to the northwest. Our biggest area for the possibility of tornadoes was going to be further down to the south. But again, we could maybe, probably not, but it's a very large maybe, see the possibility of a brief marginal tornado, or maybe even just a funnel cloud in that region further off to the northwest, with very marginal curvature in the low levels of the hodograph, with 110 effective inflow storm relative helicity, and sufficient instability to support the possibility of a marginal brief tornado. Very marginal, very weak, probably no greater than 100 miles per hour in wind speeds, if even. Again, the tornado risk is there. It's just very small. Taking a look at our 10-meter wind gust model for our College of DuPage, and how that's going to indicate the risk for isolated damaging wind gusts for today. We are going to see, again, the possibility of isolated damaging wind gusts, if even. I'm not really seeing any areas on the most recent HRRR run, which is the 2022Z model run as of now. Not really any areas I'm noticing associated with severe thunderstorm development. As you can tell, we're probably not going to see much when it comes to severe damaging wind gusts, as we don't really have the greatest lapse rate, which is more beneficial when it comes to a risk for severe damaging wind gusts. We want to see better lapse rates for a better risk for damaging wind gusts. However, because we don't really have that, we're not really going to see that much of a great risk for damaging wind gusts. If we do see the possibility of damaging wind gusts, it's going to be rather marginal and probably not very strong. And even on our models, given the fact that our storms on our most recent model runs were not the most robust, they're probably not really going to be showing up or registering much of a risk for damaging wind gusts on any of our model runs. Now that I told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the socials for GladiatorWX, and join the Discord for any updates on GladiatorWX, and hopefully I'll be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.